everyone, this video is really about two clouds. It's about two techniques we use to practice on a regular basis. Hopefully you'll get something out of this. Just giving this palette a bit of a wash. Rinse. Mind you, I'm not going to waste the colour. I'll actually use this colour in this exercise. So, nice cobalt. Bit of alizarin into that to make my purple. Cobalt. Now a bit of burnt sienna to make that mid grey. Burnt sienna. You want to just get the burnt sienna once you've made the purple with your cobalt and alizarin. You want to now start adding the burnt sienna so that you start to knock off the purpliness. You'll never achieve it 100%, but once you start adding the burnt sienna, you get very close to desaturating the purple out of the tone. So there is still it is a still grey purple, but it's not distinctly purple. It's sort of somewhere between brown, between grey, between blue. Might just add a little bit more blue just for good measure. A bit more cobalt just so that it sneaks into the blue radar. To that blue range, that's probably good. Maybe a bit more burnt sienna now. Okay. So I've got my first wash. This is going to be for the top image. We're going to be painting our first angry, squally sort of grey clouds, grey heavens, grey clouds. So we'll do that painting. So I'll add a little bit more water because I need a lot of moisture to propel this colour along on the page. I'm using my big brush. A bit more water because I will need a lot. And as soon as I touch the paper with my colour, I'll be adding water as well. So here we go. Here we go. Bit of water just to propel it. I already have a bit of gravity there. So a bit of water, a bit more colour, while I can sort of have the tone moving across the page a bit more now. A bit more water. So, just a few lines. You can see that it's still very wet, so the colour is just the moisture is going to stay, and instead of it drying with edges, we've got a little bit of a very soft flowing tone. Now I'll start making the next darker tone, so I can still use some of this current tone. Perhaps I'll just make it up here in this top corner. So I'll take a bit of that colour from here, add it to here, and then start, in fact, just a little bit, and I'll start making a stickier tone. Same colour, same combination of colours, so it's still the cobalt blue, same alizarin, so I'll make up that same purple. Now that's two purples, so I get a bit more cobalt into that mix. Now my image is starting to dry on the page, and I've just got to keep an eye on it to make sure that the dampness doesn't drain itself totally out of the top of the page there. Just add a little bit of burnt sienna. So as you can see, this colour is dark. It's a little bit stickier. It may look darker, and it probably is a more concentrated tone to the one that I was making. Same colour, but I've just created it with less moisture, so I have less water, which means it's a little bit stickier. And now I'm just going to wait until I start seeing the top edges. They start to be looking to dry up. You can still see that there are very wet areas down the bottom of this piece, starting to dry up, or at least reduce the dampness at the top. So I'll take this colour and I'll start playing up here. I won't start bringing it down, but I'll start dropping it in, and you can tell that the paint is either too wet, or the paper's too wet, sorry, by the colours running dramatically, but they're not running too much. So I suspect I'm sort of okay to still be dropping this dark tone in. Now you can sort of see that it's running a little bit here. If I wanted to achieve more of the run, I can just tilt the paper up and sort of play with the runniness of that the pigment. But I'll just play with it down into these other areas. I know that it's still a little bit too damp, but I'm not going to rush down here to the lower parts where it is still very damp. I can sort of play with this slightly stickier tone, just overlay some of those existing spots as I go. So I'm just going to try and manage this drying process a little bit, and whilst I've put this darker tone, I'll now start making up another even slightly dark, stickier tone as well. So more cobalt I'll put into this pan on the side, and I'll just add a little bit of moisture. So there's the cobalt, a little bit of alizarin. Still need some more cobalt because it's a little bit too pink. Keeping an eye on the painting, on the wetness of the page. So that's a purpley mix, very sticky. Bit of burnt sienna into that. So you can see the colour's the same. It's darker and therefore more intense. And you can sort of see how it's moving in that pan like that, or not moving much, it's leaving trails. Then that's fairly sticky in terms of its consistency. It's not cream. If you were using the way we've been gauging our colours before, it's not cream, but it certainly isn't milk, but it's fairly sticky. So somewhere between this one and the previous one, I'll be now able to apply. Now there are still very wet streaks in the paper, so I've got to watch that as I start to now use this sticky tone into some of these areas. Now I might try and risk a few of these areas, just to sort of, in a way, it's not so much of a risk, it's more of a case of just adding some and testing the dryness or the wetness of the paper. Okay, so that holds beautifully, and it just dissipates a little bit around the edges. So that means that we're ready to sort of play with this next tone, this next thickness of tone. And you can sort of see as I'm brushing it out, the pigment is just softly spreading out into the previous tone I've overlaid. So now I can quite comfortably work to bring this particular tone over the previous one, and that'll allow me to achieve some of these nice soft edges that is really sort of the suggested darker clouds over lighter clouds, you know, sort of the dark, gnarly, angry clouds. So I'm just going to keep watching to make sure. There's a very wet piece here, another one here, and another one here. So I've got to watch and manage how I place paint into those areas. But in those other areas where we've got slightly bulby paper because of the paper buckling, you know, I can work on those particular areas. So I can work in there before it starts to dry too much, and I can sort of play and manage the level of tone. Now it's starting to dry, but I can still see that I can achieve some of these nice soft edges. I'm just dropping in a little bit of calligraphy now at the point of the brush, just to start accentuating some of the finer grain of these clouds. You can sort of see it's holding, but maybe not quite. So again, I'll just drop that darker tone in over the top where I can, being careful that this is still very wet and damp. And this paper is still, it's all still fairly damp. I'm just watching it against the sheen, against the reflection to the light. So I'm just managing this. So here are my angry clouds being built up. So I'm not going to do too much more up in that upper area. It's fairly well distributed with darker, stickier and mid-tones. That might be alright, something like that. I'll just grab a little bit more of this sticky. In fact, I have loaded it into my brush, but I'm just going to keep brushing it away. I want to try and achieve some really nice fine grain down through the lower areas. Now this is starting to dry here. I still see that this is fairly wet here. You can still probably see a sheen. So where it's drying on these upper elevated little areas, I might just start dropping some of my last tones. And here we go. I'll just give myself a point here. And you can see it's just now starting to dry and give me some harder edges. So I won't play too much. Getting the last of that grain. So the critical time is really once you've dropped that first layer of wash down. You've got to really keep your eyes on how quickly it's drying. In a way, you best prepare your second tone, the first of the washes over the main tone. So your second tone is really the sort of the stickier one down here. You really want to be preparing that and have that ready to go, so that you're not spending a lot of time mixing it, but you're ready to go, so that as the drying process is obviously occurring, you're being fairly vigilant to make sure that when you can play at the top, because that's going to be drying first, given that the sheet is elevated, you really want to be dropping those colours in at the top first. You've got a little bit of time to play with them up there, but not a lot, because it's drying along that top strip first as the moisture is being drained down to the bottom of this segment here. So I can see that it's starting to really lose its sheen. We're really well and truly into damp territory now, and so any sticky paint coming and dropping into this is going to hold fairly well. I mean, you'll still have a nice, as you can see, you're still seeing damp, soft edges, but this is the best time to really get some of the detail and the grain in. Also at this time is probably a good time to, if you're wanting to lift any colours out, to perhaps consider lifting some of those tones out as well. A tissue to perhaps highlight some a little bit of light creeping through in between the clouds. I won't do that in this particular scenario, but I'm fairly happy with the fact that I've got a nice dark sky. So that's still fairly damp up here. Getting some edges. You know, we're starting to just pick up some edges now, so I'll start finishing in a tick in a minute. But as you can see, this nice grain of soft edges now still forming. So these are my storm clouds. And I might just pick up another little brush to try and achieve some very, very soft, very light. I have to dry this brush and make sure I don't have too much moisture on it, and then pick up some of the sticky colour again. In fact, I'll dry a little bit of that. I just wanted to pick up some very, very little wispy sort of edges of the clouds. So now we're starting to get fairly dry now, so I really have to be careful about what sort of lines I'm wanting to see. It's a little bit soft here, but you can see, so here are my little clouds, dots and dots. So there we are. So that's it. I'm happy with that. So that's the painting of angry storm clouds. Okay, so this next panel we're going to paint another series of clouds. Now this series of clouds I sort of like to treat as a warm-up, exercise, a nice series of puffy, gorgeous cumulus clouds. I sort of imagine that these clouds are sort of sitting out over the ocean, where they're sitting a couple of kilometers out. You're getting a lot of sun touching the tops of these clouds, but you're also getting this beautiful atmospheric distant tone, this light sort of purpley grey of the distance, of where the tone underneath the clouds is really that distant shadow that sits between the clouds and, say, the ocean. So I treat this as an exercise every so often, along with this particular one at the top with the storm clouds. So as a pair, I like doing one of each every so often, just to sort of keep my sharpness when it comes to the two techniques. This top technique is very much about wet on wet, and being able to control your initial first wet wash and then subsequent layering over the top of that in progressively stickier tones. And by meaning sticky, what that means is that progressively, as the paper's drying and you're adding pigment over another pigment, when you're making a stickier pigment than the previous one, you're preventing, in a lot of cases, the occurrence of the dreaded cauliflower. Because the cauliflower is, as we all know when we're painting in watercolors, it's really a dramatic effect, whereby when you're putting a wet paint on top of another wet paint where that earlier wet paint has now started to dry, you're really increasing the chances of that second wash, which is very watery, just attracting itself to anything that's dry or nearly dry on that first wash layer, and the water of the second wash just runs out over the first one and penetrates and picks up and stops wherever it's found a dry piece of paper. And so it could run in some cases, you know, for quite a distance. In other occurrences, it just literally spreads out a little bit and literally freezes a cauliflower over that first wash. So this wet on wet exercise is a good way of practicing to avoid those types of cauliflower occurrences. So I take it and do that type of practice in these sort of stormy clouds. The second exercise, again, is more of a dry brush exercise. It still has some mixing and wet on wet as we run around the bottom to in terms of this the example that will show you. But there's a lot of dry brush to begin with. We then capture that with a bit of a mix and then run a grey tone and push that up underneath the clouds to try and reveal more of a soft, jaggedy, dry brush effect to that edge as well. So we'll do that, and so you'll see both effects. So these are two good practicing examples, two good examples to practice. In this particular case, I'll use a little bit of, I might just wipe down my palette first. I'm using cerulean blue and a little touch of cobalt to that, so that we're not sort of just using one color but a number of two of the blues. So that also has a little bit of the gray in there. That doesn't matter. I mean, in all honesty, all of these colors get mixed with something fairly dirty, so I'm not so concerned about that. But here we are, a little bit of moisture just to get it running around a little bit. Now this is going to be more of a dry brush, and we're going to use the heel of the brush to give us some of those rough edges to the clouds. So this will be fairly quick, but you'll see me really working with this heel very quickly, and then I'm going to go back and collect more of the blue to fill in the gaps around the top. So here we go. There we go. So holding it like so. Very quickly, very quickly. This is the raspiness of the heel of the brush. It just does beautiful things. You can't achieve that sort of raspiness in any other way. I'll quickly collect up all of those colors together. So just fixing a lot of that together like that. Adding some more blue. Coming around. A bit more dry brush around this way. Okay, connect up the blue there. Just touched a little bit of water to the blue and a little bit of that previous purpley grey that I made, just to sort of darken the tone up a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. Here we go. Bit of water, and quickly back before this dries, just brush that in a little bit just so that we've got a mix. That's probably too blue, so I'll just add a little bit more of the grey that I have here. Oh, that's better. Run that across. So very quickly run that across like so. Very quickly wash that brush out as quickly as you can, and then I tend to push it up and around like so. Now I'm mixing it with the bottom, but see the gorgeous dry brush effects that you're getting. So I'm pushing up and down. So that's that. I rinse that brush out again. This time drying it on the edge of the water. I grab a little bit of yellow ochre this time, just a touch of yellow ochre, and the yellow ochre is really just to sort of suggest some, so I just dry the brush, just some of the nice warmth that you get when you're trying to reveal, when the clouds are just playing with the sun. So you're getting this nice sort of glowing yellow edges. Now, mind you, this is a very quick exercise. It's just it's more of a exercise about just practicing some of the dry brush. So exactly right with the color, I'm not so fussed, but really just to give you that feeling of dry brush, both top and bottom. And this is just one of those examples. I can sort of play with that tone down here a little bit if I want to just give it a little bit of randomness through here. So that's that one. So those are the two examples. So rolling in with the cerulean blue and the cobalt blue with the heel of the brush to give you this raspy edge, and then rolling around the side here. Now this paper is obviously starting to get a little bit old, running around, adding a little bit of that grey that I made from the earlier, the purpley grey from the earlier example. Now with that tone running right across it very quickly, washing the brush out, then working with the water and pushing that grey up to the underside of the clouds, then drying my brush, mixing a little bit of ochre and very quickly playing a little bit of that ochre up into the edges of that earlier grey here, and then with a finger or again with the heel of the brush just massaging it around, being careful obviously not to connect the two, because you really want to try and maintain a really nice rough white edge to the tops of those clouds. So in essence, there's our there are our two examples. If you wanted to extend it a little bit further and perhaps play with a water base, for example, the bottom of the, maybe there's the ocean underneath this second example, so you can make up a purple tone. I'm just quickly going to make up another purple tone with the cobalt and a little bit of the alizarin. A bit more cobalt and alizarin. You don't want this too wet. Sticky ones relatively good, like somewhere between a milk and a cream, something like that. And while it's still damp, you can then sort of run a very quick sort of wash through there. Now that's not perfect, but it's that sort of distant, it's that the ocean, the line of the ocean and the clouds hovering above a distant horizon, and so you get that nice grey purple tone just hovering above a nice soft horizon line edge there. Well, as you saw, two different images, two different techniques. It's just a really good practice exercise. Do a lot of practice with this particular series. Pick a different subject matter, but practice something wet on wet and dry brush. Practice makes perfect. Well, maybe not perfect, but you just can't do it without more practice.